Hello everyone, my name is Logan and I will be telling you about salvation history. Salvation history is the story between God and mankind restoring their relationship over time with covenants and finally Jesus. There are 7 main stories throughout salvation history: the story of creation, the fall of man, the story of Noah, the story of Abraham, the story of Moses, the story of David, and finally the story of Jesus. The story of creation is when God created everything in the world in 7 days. On the first day, God created light to separate from the dark. On the second day, God created the sky. On the third day, God created dry land, seas, plants, and trees. On the fourth day, God created the sun, moon, and stars. On the fifth day, God created animals that live in the sea and animals that can fly. On the sixth day, God created animals that live on land and humans, made in God's image. Everything God created was for humans to use and enjoy. Finally, on the seventh day, God finished his work of creation and rested, making the seventh day a special holy day. The fall of man is a story about Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were the first humans created, and they lived in the Garden of Eden. God gave the two everything they needed to live. They could eat anything they wanted, but they couldn't eat from the tree of knowledge. One day, Eve was by herself, and the devil, disguised as a serpent, went to Eve and told her to eat from the trees of knowledge. The devil tricked her, and she ate from the tree, and also gave Adam some fruit from the tree. Their eyes were open, and they realized they were naked and hid from God. God found them, and he was very furious. He banned them from the garden, making them susceptible to pain, suffering, and sin. He did promise to send a savior to free mankind from sin and restore the relationship with God. The story of Noah is about God sending a flood to wipe out all sin on earth. God told Noah to build an ark for his family and to bring 2 of every animal, male and female, on the ark. Before the flood, Noah brought the animals and his family in the ark, and the flood lasted for 40 days, wiping out all the sinful things on the planet. After the 40 days, they had to wait about a year for the earth to recover and the water to die down. Finally, it was safe to go outside, and Noah immediately built an altar to God, giving thanks to him. God made a promise with Noah to never send a flood ever again, wiping out the earth. The story of Abraham is about God planting the seeds of his great nation with the covenant with Abraham. He made a covenant with God, basically saying, "Your people will obey me, and I will lead your path and grant you the land of Israel." As a sign of this, all Jewish men are circumcised. Abraham was an old man and lived in a nice home with his wife Sarah. God told him that he will make him a great nation and bless his people if he leaves his country and sets out to the land of Canaan. Also, Abraham and his wife could never have children because of their old age. Suddenly, when God gave them a baby, and they were very happy. God later then tested Abraham's trust in him when he told Abraham to sacrifice his son. Before he killed his son, an angel came to stop Abraham, saying, "God is proud in your trust." The story of Moses shows that people can always put their faith in God, even in dire situations. Moses was adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter and grew up knowing that the Jews were slaves because of Pharaoh. One day, a bush lit on fire next to Moses, and he found out it was God speaking to him. God told him to save his people, and Moses agreed. Moses asked Pharaoh to let the Jews free, but he said no, so God sent the 10 plagues. The first plague was water turning into blood. The second plague was a swarm of frogs. The third plague was a swarm of lice. The fourth plague was a swarm of flies. The fifth plague was death of livestock. The sixth plague was boils. The seventh plague was hail. The eighth plague was a swarm of locusts. The ninth plague was darkness. And the 10th and final plague was the death of firstborn. Pharaoh's and everyone's firstborn died in the kingdom except the Jews because they put sacrificed lamb blood on their houses to protect themselves from it. Pharaoh finally let the Jews go, but changed his mind and chased them into the Red Sea. Moses trusted God and parted the sea open so the Jews could escape, and crashed the sea onto Pharaoh and his army when they tried to cross. After that, the Jews traveled to Mount Sinai, and Moses climbed the mountain to speak to God. Up there, he received the 10 Commandments and made a covenant with God. The covenant was that the Jews follow God's sacred laws and God will give them the promised land. Moses was taking too long, so the Jews built a golden calf to worship. Moses was furious and broke the 10 Commandments when he smashed them on the ground. The story of David starts off with a battle between the Jews and the Philistines. One Philistine, a giant named Goliath, mocked the Jews while asking if anyone wanted to fight him. A small boy named David took the daring task and fought Goliath. Goliath mocked him because he had no weapons, but David put his faith in God and slung a rock at the giant's head. The rock directly hit Goliath in the head, knocking him out. David took a sword and cut off his head, allowing for the Jews to win the battle over the Philistines. Later, David became king and made a covenant with God. The covenant was that from the line of David, a king will emerge to save the day, hinting at Jesus. Finally, all of salvation history leads here. Just a quick reminder, salvation history is God trying to repair his relationship with his people and return us to heaven. God makes covenants with different people like Moses, David, and Abraham because he loves us so much and wants to help us stay away from sin. Even though he made those covenants, God's chosen people sin and sin again. So God had to send one final thing to end all of sin, Jesus. Jesus was born by his mother Mary in Bethlehem. When growing up, Jesus would preach the good news to people. Some thought of him as a fake king, so they crucified Jesus. Jesus is the new Adam because Adam's job in the garden was to protect Eve, but he failed. Jesus is like Adam because he protects us from evil and sin. Jesus would be the fulfillment to salvation history when he dies on the cross and resurrects after his death. Jesus was the salvation God promised at the beginning of Genesis. Jesus shows the new sacred law by preaching and winning over death. Finally, Jesus was the king that would come from the line of David and save the day. Jesus won over sin by transcending death. Jesus is the perfect mediator between God and his chosen people. Jesus is the salvation to all humanity.